I'll be honest, my marriage to Claire had been a bit rocky for the past year. Nothing major had happened, but something just felt off. It started with small things, like her being a little more guarded about her phone, or leaving for girls' nights a bit more often. But I never wanted to be the guy who snoops around. I valued our trust too much to ruin it with paranoia. Then, about 2 months ago, she told me she'd lost her wedding rings. She came home from work one day, looking visibly upset, and told me that she thought she'd left them at the gym and that they must have fallen out of her locker. I remember feeling so bad for her in that moment. I mean, those rings were symbolic for both of us, something we'd chosen together. So, of course, I tried to comfort her, telling her that they were just things, and we'd get new ones if she didn't find them. I could see her shoulders relax, a small hint of relief passing over her face. Now, looking back, I feel like an idiot for not questioning it. Claire had always been so careful with her things. I should have known better. But I didn't, and I let it slide. Days went by, then weeks. Claire didn't bring up the rings much after that, and I figured she was just upset and didn't want to talk about it. In the meantime, I started to notice a few more things. For one, her phone was practically glued to her. She'd started carrying it with her everywhere, and she never left it on the kitchen counter like she used to. She also became a little more distant, sometimes zoning out during conversations or even staying out later than usual. One Saturday morning, I decided to clean up the garage. I was moving stuff around when I remembered that Claire had taken the car the night before to one of her girls' nights. She'd left it a mess, as usual, with some empty coffee cups and a gym bag tossed in the back seat. I thought about leaving it for her to clean up, but I decided to be nice and tidy it up myself. I was halfway through when I noticed something shoved into the small compartment under the passenger seat. At first, I thought it might be a napkin or a grocery receipt that had slid under there. But when I pulled it out, my stomach twisted. It was a used condom. Not a wrapper, an actual, used condom. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at it, my mind racing. 100 thoughts flashed through my head in those seconds. Maybe it wasn't hers. Maybe it was from someone else's car and ended up here by mistake. Maybe she was holding it for a friend. I tried to rationalize it, but the feeling gnawing at my gut told me none of those were true. When I finally got the nerve to confront her that evening, she just looked at me, wide-eyed, and claimed she didn't know how it got there. She said it wasn't hers, and she had no idea who'd left it in her car. Maybe it was one of my friends, or a valet, she suggested. I wanted to believe her, but the whole situation just didn't add up. The distance, the lost rings, the secretive phone habits, it all felt like pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to solve. That night, I lay awake, feeling torn apart. On one hand, I wanted to believe Claire, the woman I'd loved for so many years. But on the other, something deep down told me that I needed to know the truth. I couldn't let it go. I kept replaying her reaction over and over in my mind. There was something there, something guarded, almost calculated. That's when I realized, I needed to find out for myself. This was just the start of a journey I didn't expect to take. I wasn't about to give up on my marriage without knowing the truth, but I knew that confronting her again wouldn't lead to anything but more excuses. So I made a decision. I was going to hire a private investigator. I'd never done anything like this before. The very thought felt extreme, but I was desperate for answers. I spent the next few days researching agencies and private investigators, finding someone who'd come highly recommended online. His name was Tom, a former police detective with a reputation for finding out exactly what was going on behind closed doors. I called Tom, explained the situation, and asked him if he thought I was being unreasonable. He paused for a moment before saying, "Look, no one hires a PI because they want to. They do it because they need the truth. If your gut's telling you something's off, there's a reason." His words hit me hard. I didn't want to do this, but at that moment, I realized I couldn't live in the dark. So, I hired him. After I hired Tom, he told me to expect a bit of a wait. He explained that he'd need some time to follow Claire discreetly and gather evidence without tipping her off. These things don't happen overnight, he'd said. But I could barely sleep, caught between wanting answers and dreading what he might find. Every day was torture. I'd leave for work, come home, and sit in the quiet, thinking. And every time Claire was out late or on her phone in another room, I'd catch myself scrutinizing her every move. I didn't want to, I hated it. I'd married this woman because I trusted her with my life, my future, my heart. But I was starting to feel like I didn't even know her anymore. Tom had set up a few surveillance measures. He'd installed a small tracking device in her car, which would let him see where she was going. I also gave him the name of her closest friends and a few places she frequented. For the most part, things looked normal. She was going to the gym, the coffee shop, work. There was nothing obviously suspicious at first. But after about a week, Tom called me with an update that made my stomach drop. "Listen, I wanted to give you a heads up," he said. "We tracked her to a hotel on the outskirts of town yesterday. She was there for almost 3 hours." His voice was professional, steady, but I could hear the underlying concern. My heart pounded in my chest. "I have photos, if you want to see them." I wasn't sure I could handle seeing anything yet. A part of me still hoped this was all just one big misunderstanding. But another part of me knew I needed to face it. I arranged to meet Tom that evening in a parking lot near my office. Sitting there in my car, waiting for him, I felt a sense of dread creeping over me. This was real, and I was about to get the answers I'd been seeking. When Tom arrived, he handed me a sealed folder. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" he asked, his eyes showing a flash of empathy. I nodded, took a deep breath, and opened the folder. Inside were several photos, each taken from a distance but clear enough to see her face, her expressions, her body language. In the first few, Claire was entering the hotel lobby. She was alone, dressed in a way I hadn't seen her in years, a short dress, high heels, her hair and makeup done up like she was going on a date. I felt a sickening pang of betrayal even at that, realizing she'd been making an effort for someone else while she'd barely bothered at home. The next few photos were of her leaving the hotel. But this time, she wasn't alone. She was with a man, someone I didn't recognize. He looked younger than me, maybe in his early 30s, well-dressed, with a smug grin on his face. They were laughing, close enough that she could have just leaned in and kissed him. I stared at those images, my hands shaking, feeling a mixture of anger, humiliation, and grief. "Who is he?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. "That's what we're still trying to find out," Tom replied. "We've started digging into his background, but we should have more information in a few days." He paused, his tone softening. "I know this isn't easy. You did the right thing by coming to me, but it's going to take time to get the full picture." I tried to process it all, the man, the hotel, the time she'd spent there. 3 hours. What could she possibly have been doing in those 3 hours that didn't involve cheating? But then I thought about the used condom, the excuses, the lost rings. I felt a wave of nausea and had to sit back, closing my eyes and taking a deep breath. Over the next few days, I tried to act as normal as possible around Claire. Every time I looked at her, though, I felt the resentment boiling inside. I wanted to confront her right then, to demand answers. But I knew that if I did, she'd just deny it, twist the truth, make up another story. I needed Tom's help to get the undeniable proof. Meanwhile, I tried to get a hold of myself. At work, my productivity tanked, I was too distracted, too caught up in the images that were seared into my mind. Every night, I'd stare at the ceiling, remembering her laughing with that man, the way her face had lit up. It had been so long since I'd seen her look at me like that. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Tom called with an update. "We have more information on the guy," he told me, and I could hear the hesitation in his voice. His name is Brian Connolly. He's a coworker of hers, works in the same department. I felt a cold realization hit me. She'd been going to work with him, spending all day in the office alongside him, then going out with him after hours, coming home to me, and pretending everything was fine. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to confront her right there. But I forced myself to hold back, to wait just a little longer. Tom assured me that he'd keep gathering evidence, that he'd follow her if needed, document everything. And as much as it hurt, I knew I had to let him do his job. I'd already come this far, and the truth was out there, slowly coming to light. All I had to do was wait. The hardest part of this whole process was putting on a mask every day around Claire. She'd act like everything was normal, complaining about work or asking what I wanted for dinner, and I'd bite my tongue, forcing a smile, pretending. But every time she touched me, every time she kissed me, it felt like a lie. The only solace I had was the fact that I was one step closer to the truth. And once I had it, I'd make sure she'd never be able to hide behind her lies again. Days turned into what felt like months, and each tick of the clock weighed heavily on me. I was consumed by the uncertainty of it all. Tom had been diligent, providing updates when he could, but I found myself caught in a web of anxiety. Each night, I'd replay the photos in my mind, imagining every detail of Claire's affair. The man with the smug smile haunted my thoughts. Who was he, really? What did Claire see in him? And why wasn't I enough for her? As the days passed, Tom's investigations began to yield more concrete evidence. He uncovered several social media posts that tied Claire and Brian together outside of work. Photos of them attending a happy hour, laughing and standing uncomfortably close. Claire looked radiant, the same glow she used to have when we first started dating. It tore at me to see her enjoying life while I was drowning in despair. Tom's next call felt like a punch to the gut. "I've got more information," he said, a hint of urgency in his voice. "I followed them last night. They went to dinner at a nice restaurant, the Olive Garden, of all places. I got some pictures of them together." He hesitated, sensing the tension on the line. "I can send you the images, but I think you should prepare yourself." I took a deep breath and nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Send them. I need to know." When the photos arrived, I opened them slowly, each click of the mouse sending a jolt of dread through my body. In the first photo, Claire was leaning in, her laughter frozen in time. In another, Brian had his arm around her, a blatant intimacy that felt like a betrayal of everything we had built together. She looked beautiful, alive, and completely carefree. I felt anger surging within me, a visceral rage bubbling to the surface. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, the proof I needed. But instead of feeling victorious, I was hollow inside. It was a cruel reminder of what I was losing, of the love that had turned into an empty shell. Tom was relentless. "I've got more on their whereabouts," he said. "They went back to his place after dinner. I didn't follow them inside, but I can assume what happened next." A chill ran down my spine. My stomach twisted into knots. I had no idea what to say or do with this information. I thought about Claire sleeping with another man, right under my nose, in our town. How could she betray me like this? It was surreal, an emotional roller coaster I never wanted to ride. "Tom, can you find out how long this has been going on?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "I need to know if this is just a fling or if there's something deeper." "I'll dig into it. I'll get back to you as soon as I can," he replied. In the meantime, I had a lot to think about. I decided to start collecting evidence of my own, documenting Claire's behaviors, noting the times she left, the phone calls she took outside. I even started to notice little things around the house. She'd change her passwords frequently, her phone buzzing in the middle of the night with notifications she would immediately silence. One evening, after a particularly heated argument about the state of our relationship, I had tried to bring up the lost rings again, Claire stormed off, leaving me stewing in my anger and confusion. I needed to distract myself, so I grabbed a drink and turned on the TV, but my mind wouldn't settle. As I sipped my whiskey, I noticed Claire's purse sitting on the kitchen counter. I shouldn't have, but curiosity got the better of me. Maybe there was something in there, a clue, a hint, anything that could help me understand her actions. I opened the purse slowly, rummaging through her belongings. There were the usual items, makeup, a wallet, some receipts from grocery stores, but then something caught my eye, a small notebook tucked away in the side pocket. My heart raced as I pulled it out. It was a planner filled with her handwriting, but as I flipped through the pages, I found something that made my blood run cold. There, written in Claire's neat script, were dates and times, a schedule that seemed to correlate with the times she'd been busy. There were notes about dinners, meetings, and what looked like codes that didn't make sense to me. My fingers trembled as I read through it. I felt like I was stepping into a territory I wasn't prepared for. And then I found it, a line with Brian's name, circled with a pen, marked for a dinner date. I couldn't breathe. She was planning these meetups, orchestrating them like they were work appointments. It felt too calculated, too premeditated. A new wave of anger surged through me. The following day, I called Tom to share what I discovered. "You won't believe what I found in Claire's purse," I said, my voice laced with agitation. "There's a planner with dates and Brian's name in it. It's like she's treating this affair like it's a part of her job." "That's definitely a red flag," Tom replied. "It's not just a fling if she's planning it out. I'll see if I can find any more connections between them." I felt like I was teetering on the edge of a cliff, and I couldn't tell if it was the fear of falling or the anticipation of a breakthrough that made my heart race. Tom's diligence gave me hope. The more evidence we gathered, the clearer the path to confrontation would become. Days turned into weeks, and my anxiety only deepened as Tom continued to gather evidence. Each update brought more heartache and anger, yet I knew I needed the truth to confront Claire effectively. Tom provided me with more photos, Claire and Brian dining together, her laughter echoing in those captured moments. Each snapshot felt like a dagger to my heart, further solidifying my resolve to get to the bottom of this. Then one evening, I received a call from Tom that shook me to my core. "I've got more information on Brian," he said, his voice heavy with concern. "He's been seeing Claire for at least 6 months. They've been meeting up regularly." The world around me dimmed. 6 months. I felt the blood drain from my face as I processed the weight of his words. It wasn't just an affair, it was a full-blown relationship. "I need everything you have, Tom," I said, my voice shaking with determination. "I can't confront her without solid proof." Tom agreed, and over the next week, he managed to compile a comprehensive dossier. It contained photos, text messages, and a timeline of Claire's infidelities. I sat on my couch, surrounded by the evidence, feeling a mixture of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. My mind raced through memories of our life together, the happy moments, the promises we made, and how everything had spiraled into a painful reality. As I sifted through the dossier, I realized it was time to confront Claire. I wanted to be calculated about it, to catch her off guard. I couldn't let her manipulate the situation or twist the truth. I planned a weekend getaway, suggesting a short trip to the cabin we loved so much. I figured it would be the perfect backdrop for our conversation. When I presented the idea, Claire seemed enthusiastic. "That sounds great. We could use some time away from everything," she said, smiling. But I could see a hint of nervousness in her eyes, perhaps she sensed something was amiss. In the days leading up to the trip, I felt a mixture of dread and anticipation. The night before we left, I spent hours preparing. I practiced what I would say, how I would approach the subject. I wanted to be calm yet assertive, without letting my emotions get the best of me. Finally, the day arrived. As we drove to the cabin, I kept stealing glances at Claire. She seemed oblivious, excited about the scenery, while I felt a storm brewing inside. I mentally prepared myself for the inevitable confrontation, knowing it would change everything. Once we arrived at the cabin, I took a moment to gather my thoughts. The air was crisp, and the smell of pine enveloped me. I felt a surge of memories, our laughter, our love. But that joy quickly faded as I reminded myself of the impending confrontation. After settling in, we shared a meal, chatting about trivial things. I tried to act normal, but I felt the tension building. Finally, after dinner, I decided it was time. I took a deep breath and led Claire to the living room, where a cozy fire crackled in the fireplace. "Claire, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady yet heavy with emotion. She looked at me, sensing the seriousness in my tone. "About what?" she asked, feigning innocence. "About you and Brian," I replied, watching her face drain of color. "I know everything." Her expression shifted from confusion to denial in an instant. "What are you talking about?" she said, her voice rising defensively. I pulled out the dossier and laid it on the table in front of her. "These are photos of you two together, evidence of your affair. I have texts, times, dates, everything. You can't deny it any longer." Claire's eyes widened as she scanned the images, her breathing quickening. You have no right to invade my privacy," she stammered, her facade crumbling. "I had every right once you decided to betray me," I shot back, anger bubbling to the surface. "How could you do this? We built a life together, and you chose to throw it all away." Claire's demeanor shifted as the reality sank in. She shifted in her seat, her defenses weakening. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, her voice trembling. It just happened. You've been so distant, so consumed with work." I felt alone. "Alone?" I echoed incredulously. "You chose to cheat rather than talk to me. You could have come to me, and we could have worked on our issues together. But instead, you betrayed me." Tears streamed down her face as she tried to justify her actions, claiming she felt neglected. But as she spoke, I realized her excuses were mere attempts to absolve herself of guilt. I felt a mixture of pity and rage. I wanted to scream, to shake her and make her understand the pain she caused, but I held my ground. "I can't believe you'd stoop this low, Claire. I trusted you," I said, my voice breaking slightly. "You've shattered everything we built together." She fell silent, the weight of her actions heavy in the air. For a moment, I felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, she would understand the magnitude of her betrayal. But then she spoke again, her tone shifting. "I never meant for it to get this far," she said, her voice filled with remorse. "It was a mistake, I swear." "A mistake?" I said, incredulous. "You think sleeping with another man is just a mistake? This is a betrayal of the highest order, Claire." The argument continued, each word exchanged laced with bitterness. I felt a tumult of emotions, anger, sadness, betrayal, and disbelief. Claire begged for forgiveness, promising to end things with Brian, but I felt the heaviness in my chest grow. "You expect me to just forgive you? To trust you again?" I said, shaking my head. "You've destroyed that trust. How can I believe anything you say?" Claire collapsed onto the couch, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I felt a pang of sympathy, but it quickly morphed into resentment. I wanted to comfort her, to hold her as I once did, but the image of her with Brian flooded my mind, extinguishing any remaining affection. "Maybe we need to take a break," I suggested, my voice softer now, but firm. "I need space to think. To process all of this." Claire looked up, desperation in her eyes. "Please, don't leave me. I love you, I do. This was just a moment of weakness. I swear I'll change." Her pleas fell on deaf ears as I stood, feeling more resolute than ever. "I can't do this right now," I said, retreating to the bedroom, leaving her alone in the living room, crying quietly. That night was one of the longest of my life. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the evening's events. My heart felt heavy, like it was encased in ice. I thought of all the moments we'd shared, the laughter, the love, now tainted by betrayal. The next morning, I woke up early, the silence in the cabin overwhelming. Claire was still asleep, her face tear-streaked, and for a brief moment, I felt a glimmer of love for her. But as the memories flooded back, that flicker extinguished. I decided to take a walk to clear my mind. The early morning air was crisp, invigorating. As I wandered the familiar trails, I found myself reflecting on our marriage. What had gone wrong? I had dedicated myself to Claire, only for her to choose another man over me. The unfairness of it all weighed heavily on my shoulders. I returned to the cabin, and Claire was waiting for me, anxiety etched on her face. "Can we talk?" she asked softly. I hesitated but nodded, knowing we needed to address the elephant in the room. We sat together on the couch, the tension palpable. "I've been thinking," Claire started, her voice shaky. "I know I messed up. I never wanted to hurt you. I'll do anything to make this right." "Anything?" I challenged. "What does that even mean? You say you'll end things with Brian, but can I trust you? Can you promise me this won't happen again?" "I swear I'll cut him out of my life," she insisted, her eyes pleading. "I love you, and I don't want to lose you over this. I'm willing to go to couples therapy, to work on our marriage." I felt torn. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to give her another chance. But another part screamed that I couldn't let myself be a doormat. "I need time to think," I said finally. "I can't make any decisions right now." Over the next few days, I kept my distance, staying in a separate room while Claire tried to navigate the wreckage of our relationship. I needed time to think about what I truly wanted. Did I want to forgive her? Could I? Tom continued to gather evidence, but I had started to reconsider if I truly wanted to proceed with legal action. I loved Claire, despite her mistakes. I missed the intimacy we once had, the quiet moments of connection. But each time I thought about her betrayal, I felt the air leave my lungs. One evening, I decided to call Tom. "How's the investigation going?" I asked, though I already knew I was torn between wanting to know and wanting to forget. "Nothing new to report," he said, his voice steady. "But I'm here for you, whatever you decide. Just remember, the evidence is still there if you choose to use it." I hung up, my heart heavy with conflicting emotions. I loved Claire, but I also felt a desperate need for self-preservation. I couldn't be the one left shattered and broken. The weight of her betrayal made it clear that a decision had to be made. Days turned into weeks as I navigated the storm of emotions. Claire continued to apologize, desperate to win back my trust, but I found it increasingly difficult to look her in the eye without feeling a twinge of anger. Finally, I reached a decision. I couldn't just sweep this under the rug. I had to protect myself and take the necessary steps to move forward. I scheduled a consultation with a lawyer, a sharp and seasoned woman named Diane, who specialized in divorce cases. She had an air of confidence that made me feel slightly more at ease. Sitting across from her in her office, I laid everything bare, recounting Claire's infidelity in the evidence I had gathered. Diane listened intently, taking notes as I spoke. "You're doing the right thing by seeking legal advice," she said. "It's essential to know your rights and the next steps you need to take, especially given the emotional trauma you've experienced." I nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. "What do I do now?" I asked. "We'll start by gathering all the evidence you have, the photos, texts, and any other documentation of her infidelity. We'll build a case that reflects the emotional damage you've endured," she explained. Her words ignited a fire within me. It felt empowering to take action, to fight back against the pain Claire had caused. We discussed the logistics of filing for divorce, how to navigate the emotional hurdles, and what to expect in court. I left the meeting feeling like I had taken control of my life again. I had been pushed to the brink, but now I was ready to stand up for myself. I would fight for my dignity and ensure that Claire understood the gravity of her actions. The days turned into a blur as the divorce proceedings began. I found myself navigating a complex legal landscape, filled with paperwork, hearings, and the ever-present emotional turmoil. Each step forward felt like a step into the unknown, but I was resolute. Tom provided ongoing support, helping me gather more evidence and prepare for the impending court battle. "You've got this," he reassured me. "Just focus on the facts, and don't let emotions cloud your judgment." I attended every court hearing with Diane by my side, her expertise guiding me through the process. It was surreal to sit in that courtroom, facing the very woman I once loved. I could see the fear in Claire's eyes as she realized the extent of her actions. During one of the hearings, I witnessed her squirm as Diane presented the evidence of her affair. The photos of Claire and Brian, laughing and intimate, painted a picture of betrayal that was impossible to ignore. I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. This was the moment I had been waiting for, yet it felt like a bitter pill to swallow. As the case unfolded, Claire attempted to play the victim, portraying herself as the misunderstood spouse who had simply made a mistake. But the evidence spoke for itself, and I refused to let her narrative sway the court. Each time she tried to twist the truth, I felt the anger rise within me, a fire that fueled my determination. I wasn't just fighting for myself, I was fighting for the dignity of our relationship, the love we once shared. As the court dates dragged on, the emotional toll began to weigh heavily on me. I found it challenging to maintain focus at work and in my personal life. Every night, I returned home to silence, the echoes of our shattered dreams haunting me. Friends and family reached out, but I often found it hard to share the depths of my pain. The weight of betrayal was heavy, and I felt an unshakable sense of loss. I missed the woman I thought I knew, the partner who had stood by my side through thick and thin. In moments of solitude, I would reflect on our memories, the laughter, the adventures, the dreams we shared. Each recollection felt tainted now, a reminder of what could have been if she hadn't made those choices. Despite the turmoil, I found solace in the support of those around me. Friends encouraged me to lean on them, to share my feelings, and slowly, I began to open up. I found strength in their words, and it became easier to confront the emotional fallout. One evening, after a particularly exhausting court session, I met up with a close friend, Jake. Over drinks, I vented my frustrations. "I just don't understand how she could do this to me," I said, shaking my head. "We had a life together." Jake listened patiently before responding, "You deserve better, man. This is her loss, not yours. Focus on healing and moving forward." His words resonated deeply within me. I realized I couldn't keep letting Claire's choices dictate my happiness. It was time to reclaim my life, to move forward with strength and resilience. As the court proceedings continued, I found myself at a crossroads. The emotional toll had taken its course, but I began to see the light at the end of the tunnel. The focus shifted from anger to healing, and I started to understand that closure was not about revenge, it was about finding peace within myself. During one of our court sessions, Claire attempted to reconcile, begging for forgiveness once again. I looked into her eyes and felt a mix of sympathy and bitterness. "I don't think you understand the damage you've caused," I said, my voice steady. "I can't just erase the past. Trust is broken, and it can't be rebuilt overnight." As I left the courtroom that day, a sense of clarity washed over me. I realized that closure wasn't just about the divorce, it was about freeing myself from the shackles of anger and hurt. I needed to let go of the past and embrace the future. I began focusing on self-care, investing time in activities that brought me joy. I started exercising regularly, reconnected with friends, and even took up painting as an outlet for my emotions. Each brushstroke felt liberating, allowing me to express the pain I had been bottling up for so long. I sought therapy as well, finding comfort in talking to a professional about my feelings. Through therapy, I learned the importance of forgiveness, not for Claire, but for myself. I needed to forgive myself for the pain I felt and the choices I made in response to her betrayal. Finally, the court reached a conclusion. The judge granted the divorce, and as I signed the papers, a wave of relief washed over me. I felt a weight lifted from my shoulders, and while the process had been painful, it had ultimately led to my freedom. Walking away from the courtroom, I felt empowered. The chapter with Claire was closed, and I was ready to embrace the next phase of my life. I had come to understand that while the past would always hold memories, it wouldn't define my future. In the weeks following the divorce, I focused on rebuilding my life. I traveled, explored new hobbies, and met new people. I learned to love myself again, to appreciate the strength I had within. The journey to healing wasn't easy, but it was necessary. As I stood on a beach one sunny day, watching the waves crash against the shore, I felt a profound sense of peace. I had weathered the storm of betrayal and emerged stronger. I was ready for new beginnings, new adventures, and maybe, just maybe, a new love. I reflected on the lessons learned through the turmoil. Life was unpredictable, but I was determined to embrace it fully. I was no longer a victim of betrayal, I was a survivor, ready to write my own story.